This is the final panel of this afternoon, though I remind you that there is a panel tomorrow morning after some snacks, 9:30 at 10 o'clock. I hope many of you will be able to come back. This panel is entitled The 2000 Nominations / The Never-Ending Story. The Never-Ending Story is the sole contribution that I made myself to the program. But let me introduce the chair of this panel and the person who organized it, and that is Susan Rasky, who joined the faculty of the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism after serving for many years as the congressional correspondent for the New York Times. Susan is at a long and distinguished career in journalism. She continues to have one on television, as well as writing for the Los Angeles Times, Sacramento Bee, and PR. Her degrees are from Berkeley and the London School of Economics, and she is a senior lecturer at the teaching graduate students, I hope, how to write well and other things. And Susan, I'll let you take over.
Thanks very much, Jack. Thank you all for being here. It's a warm afternoon, but we got, I hope, good fireworks on this panel. Let me start at that end with Gina Glantz, who is the former national campaign manager for the Bill Bradley for President campaign. She's currently a senior advisor to the president of the Service Employees International Union. And she has her own consulting firm in Washington, D.C. She's been a campaign manager, a field director, and a political consultant at about every level in government. She also worked for Howard Dean during 2004 as, and I didn't realize this, Gina, was the national field director of the Mondale-Ferraro Committee in 1984.
Win.
Yeah, okay, but so presidential experience that goes way back. On my immediate right is Lynn, who is the Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. She writes a column for the paper and a blog, and she covers politics and government from Chicago street brawls to the White House. But her coverage, for those of you who've been following the Obama coverage, I think it's fair to say that Lynn has been totally ahead of the rest of the journalistic establishment in figuring out that maybe we ought to cover Obama as a real candidate instead of as a saint. Her coverage has been just terrific, and she's the one who's been far ahead of everybody in dissecting that campaign. She also does a column for The Hill. In the spring of 2004, she was named a fellow at Harvard University's Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. She's a former president of the Washington Press Club Foundation, a member of the Gridiron, which is what's really important, and her master's is from Northwestern, but we will forgive her that because her undergraduate work was done here at UC Berkeley. And she now teaches a course on Washington policy process and politics at Medill's Washington program. And then Jen Steen, where are you? I didn't see you hiding behind Gina Glantz. Forgive me, because I would have introduced you in the proper order. Jen Steen is an assistant professor of political science at Boston College. She studies the dynamics of the electoral process in the United States, and she is the author of a wonderful, wonderful book. I can testify to it, Self-Financing Candidates in Contemporary American Elections. She's a former political consultant, so think of her as that rather than the academic she really is. But for purposes of this panel, I hope she'll be a down and dirty consultant. And prior to pursuing her doctorate at UC Berkeley, she worked for candidates in local, state, and federal elections. And I can't tell from this, Jen, are you a national delegate this time too?
No,
just
that's ancient history.
Ancient history, all right. And the gentleman on the panel, isn't it nice to have a panel? Never mind. You finish the sentence. Bob Wickers. For over 20 years, he's provided strategic communications and media services for political candidates throughout the U.S. and Europe. He co-founded the firm Dresner, Wickers, and Associates in 1993. And most recently, which I didn't realize, he served as a senior advisor to Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee when Huckabee was running for president. He began his career as a consultant to the California Senate Republican Caucus, and he was on the staff of Pete Wilson, which I also, I guess, hadn't realized. Anyway, I've asked them to make very, very brief opening remarks about the salient points from the sort of strategist's point of view and reporter's point of view about the campaign. And then I think we will spend most of our time talking back and forth to each other and then opening it up to you. You've got an amazing wealth of experience in front of you, so I would love to just sit back and let them have at it. Gina, you said you wanted to start, so go ahead.
It's age before beauty up here on the panel, so I'll go first and reveal that to you. It's a nostalgic ride coming into Berkeley today because I did attend this institution, and I passed by Oscars, where I worked in my junior and senior year as a sort of good experience to go into politics. It was also during my junior year that I first voted in a presidential election. And it was that year I voted for Lyndon Johnson against Barry Goldwater, and it was the only vote I cast that year where I was a winner. If you're old enough, you might remember that Pierre Salinger ran against George Murphy, a tap dancer, who became a U.S. Senator and should have been a harbinger of the future of actors here in California. It was also a year when one of the most despicable ballot measures appeared, which taught me a great lesson. It was on the repeal of fair housing laws here in California, and all the billboards said, vote yes on fair housing, which meant you were voting to repeal it. I admit I was probably naively surprised when it actually passed and the voters repealed fair housing in California, but at that time, a Supreme Court, the one here in California, made the right decision and overturned the voters. So that's my Berkeley experience. I, on occasion, went to class. But you know, voters continue to surprise me. However, I've come to expect to be surprised. Actually, in particular, presidential campaigns are, you know, surprises. I think that reaction to surprise is a good measure of a candidate. I think surprise keeps the public engaged in the campaign. And surprise would hope, and here's where Lynn is an exception, but that the press would look at surprise and think more deeply about their role in the process. I think the real surprise this year is that essentially this is a neck-and-neck, evenly split, down-the-middle race on the Democratic side. Once the money primary was over, and that winnowed the race down to two candidates, we've witnessed this incredible outpouring of voter involvement. I'm always sort of annoyed by people who are wringing their hands now about the state of the Democratic nomination. I think we should all be very excited about the enthusiasm that we have in the Democratic Party. But if you look at the way this race has unfolded, in the first four contests, you know, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, they were split, 2 and 2. Obama ended up with 59% of the delegates, but the states were split. Then you came to the February 5th national primary, and Obama won more states, but Clinton closed the delegate gap to almost even. Then came the Obama run, 11 of 13 races, and so he opened up a delegate lead to about 53%. And next comes the big three, I would call them Ohio, Texas, and Pennsylvania. Ohio and Texas, as you know, Clinton won and narrowed the gap a little bit, and if she should win Pennsylvania, she's bound to narrow the delegate gap a little bit more. And so it gets a little closer. Along the way, we've had the superdelegates who started with a majority for, a large majority for Clinton, but Obama's now narrowed that to about 47%. But again, we just keep this very close narrowing. So if you add it all up as of now, and somebody correct me, I might not have it exactly right, because depending on who you read, the numbers change a little bit. You know, on the delegate percent, on the elected delegate percentage side, Obama has about 52%. Just under that if you include the superdelegates. And around the popular vote, depending on whether you include all the caucuses and how much you say, how many people voted in Florida, there's somewhere between 2.4 and 1.4% advantage that he has out of 26 million votes. So after Pennsylvania, going forward, we're going to head to what I call the small four, plus North Carolina, which is too big to be called small, Indiana, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Oregon. It's not inconceivable that Clinton will win 3 smalls and he'll win Oregon and North Carolina, continuing this sort of process of both of them moving along, even though Obama will for certain stay ahead in the delegate count. Then we're off to Puerto Rico, which stands alone in importance, mostly because for some reason pundits have decided to make it that, even though it could not decide the contest by the numbers. But again, you know, at the moment, Clinton is perceived as predicted to win. And finally, if anyone is still paying attention, by the time you get to South Dakota and Montana, South Dakota, where some of you may have heard of someone named Steve Hildebrand, who's been a key advisor to Obama from the very start, who lives in South Dakota and I'm sure has talked to every single South Dakotan. You can be sure Obama will win big in South Dakota. And then there's Montana, which, who knows, Clinton's just sent somebody important out there to run it, so maybe there's some expectation and maybe she'll surprise and win there. So we're coming down to this, you know, who's up, who's down, and a very smart person I know, and a student of primary elections, wrote earlier this year, a momentum phase is a dynamic, not static process. Winning campaigns get the aura of victory, while losing candidates are seen and covered through the prism of defeat. I think probably the most, one of the most intriguing questions out of this this election season is, what happened to the momentum rule in politics? Each of them has had it and seen it, you know, not make a difference. So another rule is broken. Finally, Democrats are famous for changing their rules, believing that somehow the rules will produce winners, rather than accepting that it is the quality of candidates that really produce winners. We changed the rules to proportional representation in 1972, which we said was about fairness, and which in fact was in large part to prevent another George McGovern, an outside of the mainstream candidate selected by the voters. We changed the rules again in 1982 to include superdelegates, which we said was for peer review, but which in fact was, I think, in large part because party leaders and local activists felt left out when essentially an outsider, Jimmy Carter, had won the presidency. And of course, you know, we are forever changing the calendar, thinking somehow that will make a difference. So I'm going to end by giving you one of my rules, and the only thing I know for sure is that a rule in response to a rule will produce the need for a new rule.
Thank you. I think, at least it was my notion that we'd sort of have the consultants to insurgent candidates go first. So on that, Bob Wickers, go ahead. Talk to us about perhaps insurgency or.
Well, I like what you said about no rules, or rules being thrown out the window, because when you think about Mike Huckabee, a lot of what he did this past year defied a lot of rules. Having said that, this was my first presidential election, so I'm still kind of learning as I go here, but I learned a great deal about how difficult it is to be an insurgent candidate and how the establishment throws everything at you, and they will grind you down, and it's just a matter of time. For Ronald Reagan, he was an insurgent candidate in '76. If we look back in history, it took him 2 elections to get there. Of course, in '80, he was beloved by conservatives and Republicans, but here was an individual that took on an incumbent president in the primary in '76, and he was just anathema to the party establishment. Mike Huckabee was doing something back in 2006, and that was thinking about running for president as a governor of a small southern state. At that time, when we sat down, we were looking at what assets he had. He'd made the decision he wanted to go for it. But we faced, at that point, George Allen was looking at the race and considered a very strong favorite and a very popular candidate among conservatives. Bill Frist, Senate Majority Leader, who was very powerful at that point in time. Sam Brownback, the senator from Kansas, beloved conservative, again, social conservative, coming out of that wing of the party. And even George Pataki, the governor of New York, was looking at it, not to mention Mitt Romney and Rudy Giuliani, and the list goes on. We know who ultimately ran. What I'd like to talk about today as we get into the question and answer and the discussion is our view of the race early on was simply we viewed it as who was going to be the conservative alternative to John McCain. And so it was really kind of a primary to make the runoff approach for us. And we knew that we had a tremendously gifted candidate, a fabulous communicator, somebody who can connect with not just Republicans, not just conservatives, but Americans. And he did. I think that's what we saw. We knew we had that. Mike Huckabee knew he had that skill. He was also somebody who was very talented at using and leveraging the media and taking advantage of the use of so-called new media, constantly keeping things fresh, being unique and different. And that's really what the campaign for us was about, was featuring Mike and leveraging those skills and taking advantage of the fact that in a presidential election, what's most important really is the media coverage, the national media press corps, as I think we'll hear later on in this discussion, tends to make paid media not as valuable. I will argue today, however, that paid media did come in handy and it helps launch a campaign, it helps get you noticed. It certainly helped us in Iowa. But once it gets rolling, and once an insurgent candidate like Mike Huckabee takes off and gains traction, you come under increasing scrutiny. And the National Press Corps really takes over. It takes the campaign over and kind of either launches you or destroys you. And if you can survive and make it through that crucible, you're going to be stronger for it. Mike Huckabee was a different kind of candidate, and that was a key part of his campaign. You know, his humor, his understanding of the internet and the power of cable television, total access to the media. A lot of what John McCain did in 2000 and what a lot of folks found most attractive about John McCain in 2000 was similar here this past year with Mike Huckabee. Complete and total access. Reporters loved him. And they had a real hard time with that because it's hard to dislike Mike Huckabee. He was also had a very positive message, a very hopeful message. He's a social conservative, no question about it, but he truly believes that caring about human beings doesn't stop at conception or even stop at childbirth. It really is to the natural end of things. It is, we have a responsibility as conservatives and as pro-life social conservatives to care about things like disease, obesity, poverty, education, the environment. So he was a very unique and different type of conservative Republican and a very different and unique type of social conservative within the party, somebody who could connect with homeschoolers, fair taxers, evangelicals, but at the same time, as he said himself over and over, he's a conservative, but he's not mad at anybody. His incredible sense of humor was featured time and time again, whether it was the Colbert Report, The Daily Show, Bill Maher's show, you know, ultimately Leno and Letterman. These were opportunities for him to really feature how, you know, he was a regular guy. You can like him. He wasn't a scary conservative Republican, somebody that, you know, he certainly was not George Bush, let's put it that way. And the country, as we all know, including Republicans, are really looking for change. We're looking for a new way forward, and Republicans are no different than Democrats or independent on that score, in my view. Knowing the talents, knowing the attributes and how to leverage that, it really came down to tactics. And the only thing that could really kill, as we used to tell each other, the only thing that could really kill this candidacy early on was just clinical depression. You know, showing up at events in Iowa where 6 people are there. showing up for your press availability, and 2 reporters are there, and one of them's from the local high school. You know, and knowing that it's all about building up to, number one, the Iowa straw poll on August 11th. Come in second place. It doesn't matter what happens, we need to come in second place, not third place. We have to get Sam Brown back out of the race. We know Mitt Romney is going to go the distance. We know at that time that Rudy Giuliani and John McCain, 2 of the more moderate Republicans in the race, were not going to compete in Iowa. They took a pass. So we knew that if we could get through the straw poll on the 11th, then we could go heads up with Mitt Romney. That Mitt Romney was really running, obviously, an incredibly well-financed campaign, but a flawed campaign in terms of the messaging and who he was trying to become in front of Iowa voters. And we knew that in a small state, you know, my experience over the last 20 years has been in statewide campaigns for governor, U.S. Senate, attorney general, lieutenant governor, a few congressional races here and there, but mostly statewide races. And at some point, the laws of diminishing return kick into gear for politics as well as anything else. And we knew that in Iowa, we were going to get to a point where our message was going to burn in. It was going to penetrate. And nothing that Mitt Romney could do was going to prevent us. We were not going to get shouted out. We were going to be heard. And so it was very important, again, for us to make sure that on August 11th we came in second. Brownback cooperates. He drops out of the race after that. That opened things up wonderfully for us. But we couldn't stop there because we're still coming in second place. Nobody really took notice, even at that point. You know, in years past, I think Phil Gramm, did he tie Bob Dole? I can't remember. Came in, I think he tied Bob Dole on the straw poll, and suddenly his campaign just took off. Well, ours didn't. We expected it might, but it didn't. So it was more, you know, battling the clinical depression part of the campaign. Well, gee, why aren't things taking off? All right, let's get back at it. Let's work our base. Let's spend time in Iowa. Let's continue to run a national campaign. While we're campaigning in Iowa, it was very important that he stayed on the air nationally, because for one good reason, online fundraising. We were living off the land week to week to week, and it was all based on the online fundraising. I think we raised $16 million total. Giuliani raised $77 million. I think McCain, up into the first quarter of this year, raised $75 million. Romney raised $129 million. We raised and spent $16 million. Out of that $16 million, $10 million came off the internet, online contributions. So it was important while we did campaign locally in Iowa that it was still a national campaign in the sense that we had to keep them on the cable shows, we had to keep doing things differently that other candidates were not necessarily doing. They were doing, at that point, Iowa, spending a lot of time in New Hampshire, a lot of time in Iowa, a lot of time in Florida, some in South Carolina. For us, it was going from Iowa to New York, Iowa to D.C., Iowa to New York. Cable show, cable show, cable show. And for us, it meant, again, additional support online, more dollars coming into the campaign, allow us to go out and continue the race. As we all know, we can go into it. I know I want to keep this somewhat brief, but we can discuss it a little bit later in the panel. But we did some creative advertising in Iowa. That was very helpful. Also drew some very stark contrast with our opponent in Iowa. The Iowa victory, obviously, we at that point took off. I would say the only positives to being an insurgent candidate initially is you don't have to come under, you can kind of be a little bit under the radar and run your own campaign without too many distractions and the press scrutinizing you. But once you take off, obviously you come under increased scrutiny, and that's when we began to run into our first bumps in the road along the campaign for the nomination. So with that, that's kind of what I'd like to talk about today as we move through this panel discussion. And again, thank you for having me.
All right. Jen, I want you to split yourself, half your consultant self and half your academic self, and tell me, what does financing mean, or what does insurgency mean when somebody like Ron Paul can raise $35 million online? What are the new rules of the game? Is this some weird transition period that we're in? and we're going to go back to having rules, or are we in now totally anarchy for the next few election cycles?
I don't think we're totally anarchy for the next few election cycles. I mean, $35 million is still pretty small potatoes when you compare it. Well, maybe not small potatoes, but it's not very big potatoes compared to the hauls of some of the other candidates, and the front runners in the race.
But for a non-serious candidate, I'm astonished that much money is out there that people are.
Well, I think that it's clearly. I mean, you mentioned the internet, and I think that's clearly a function of the internet. It's much easier for Ron Paul to meet the folks who would be interested in contributing enough small dollars to get him up to $35 million. I think that would have just been impossible to do before the internet made it so easy to reach those people. I don't know anything about Ron Paul's fundraising operation, but I imagine they probably had email lists and people trying to stir up this stuff for him. And so the technology has made a difference for if you want to call him an insurgent candidate. I mean, I think for insurgents kind of implies that you then went somewhere, right? But for small niche candidates, so that's made a difference. You'd asked me in our email yesterday to talk about how that may or may not affect the advantage of self-financing, and I actually think it has no effect on the advantage of self-financing. In the research that I've done on self-financing, which is focused on congressional House and Senate elections, my conclusion has always been, it's just not such a big deal, and the biggest threat is that these folks can scare other competitors out of the race, which doesn't really apply in a presidential election. Nobody gets frightened away and decides not to run because Mitt Romney says, I'll spend a whole bunch of money. I did, watching this race, there were a couple of developments on the self-financing front that were pretty atypical and that surprised me and went against stuff that I've written and stuff that I've said. I hope that no one can see the egg on my face, but Mitt Romney really did a brilliant job self-financing this cycle. I mean, I was really impressed. In the past, we've seen self-financers really waste a lot of money, blow huge amounts of money, like Steve Forbes and to a lesser extent Ross Perot, but just not, you think of Forbes just not getting any traction. Romney self-financed early, and he used his money to generate fundraising. He used his money to go out and get the bundlers that William Brandt was talking about earlier. He didn't use it to substitute for bundlers. He used it to sort of jumpstart that. You may remember the coverage of his big fundraising day he had at the convention center in Boston, and the costs of that were paid for by his initial infusion of cash. And as Romney's campaign progressed, he kept dropping a few $1 million here, dropping a few $1 million there, but it was evenly spaced and was ended up totaling about a third of his total receipts. This is a guy who ended up raising a very impressive amount of money from people who were not himself. The big surprise, though, for me was that Hillary Clinton gave herself, I'm sure you all know, $5 million on February 7th. And so my phone started ringing, and I thought, oh good, I get some press hits tomorrow. My Google News alert will be full of my name. And I was telling reporters, yeah, she's toast. This is really bad. This smells like, they're desperate. She's out of it. She's self-financing $5 million. That is just such a bad sign. Well, we all know that Hillary Rodham Clinton is still in the race, right? I was very off there. And if you even, I'll put it up in a minute. I've looked at the fundraising per day from the Federal Election Commission, downloaded the raw data and mapped it daily. The day after Clinton made and announced that $5 million infusion was her best fundraising day of 2008. She spiked and far exceeded Barack Obama's haul on that day. It was really remarkable. So these were surprises from 2008 on the self-financing front. My chapter in the book that we're going to be producing from this conference is about something totally different, and I feel obliged to mention a few points from it. Jack had asked me to think about how the evolution of the process related to race, sex, religion, and age, and so given the time constraints of Boss Rasky down here, I'm not going to tell you everything that I learned as I was reviewing the data that's been generated so far on 2008. But I do want to make just a couple of points, and if anyone's interested in probing it further, certainly we can talk about it in the Q&A. I think it's obvious that the most obvious reform related to race and ethnicity was the promotion of Nevada and South Carolina to the pre-window period. And the goal was explicitly to incorporate the voices of blacks and Latinos. And I actually was really struck when Congressman Price mentioned that, and he didn't say anything about geographic diversity, because that the idea of having a southern state and a western state was really talked about at the time that the commission was considering these reforms. But you don't hear anything about that now. He didn't even mention it. Clearly, these states were promoted to. As I said, incorporate the voices of blacks and Latinos. So did it matter? Did it have any practical effect on the outcome and whether blacks and Latinos had more influence on who the nominee eventually will be? It's hard to say because we don't know who the nominee's going to be. But I think the answer is yes, but not a huge effect. Right? I was actually really disappointed I didn't have any blockbuster findings here. We all know that Obama won South Carolina, and he did very, very well among African Americans. But it's hard to say that the outcome of or that the way that the nomination has progressed was really radically affected by that. I mean, I personally believe, and looking at some of the data, I think this is probably true, that maybe if South Carolina went later, Clinton would have enjoyed a little bit more momentum, and she might not have had to have self-financed $5 million. But I really think that the difference was made on the margins. Obama did get fabulous media coverage out of South Carolina. The headlines talked about the wind at our backs, and I counted the word trounce in a couple of headlines. Obama wins big. He definitely got wonderful media coverage out of that South Carolina primary, and if it hadn't been as early, that wouldn't have wouldn't have had as much influence on his progression through the primaries. And he also got a very nice fundraising boost out of South Carolina and actually out of Nevada too. Again, looking at the fundraising per day, and I think I won't pull it up on the screen because the time it'll take me to get it up there will eat up all the rest of my remaining time to talk. But if you're interested, I can throw that up there for you. You can really see when you track Obama and Clinton's fundraising per day that it is affected by the outcomes of these races. So we'll never know what would have happened under a different schedule because we can't turn the clock back and run a different election. But there are clear patterns that that the fundraising is responding to the results of each event. The second point I want to make, it was something that it's come up in a couple of other comments today, is that I think that Andrew Bush talked about how caucuses really are a screening event, right? They filter out participants in the presidential nomination decisions. And what I haven't heard anybody say yet is, although I was out of the room tending to the screaming baby for a moment, so I may have missed this, but we haven't talked about, or I haven't heard about who was screened out by caucuses, right? Who wasn't participating in the decision because certain states had caucuses instead of primaries. And political scientists actually, there isn't really a whole lot of data and a whole lot of analysis of this question. I was surprised because, of course, I went to look for this when I was preparing my paper for this conference. And the studies that I could find were really old. But it does seem, clear that the main filter has to do with education and income. In other words, our classic status variables. And I think that it's not telling you anything you don't know, that whites, blacks, Hispanics, other groups have different distributions among them of wealth, education, income, et cetera, right? So when you're filtering on status, you're basically depressing the turnout of blacks and Latinos more than you are depressing the turnout of whites, right? So using caucuses does have that racially tinged effect. I have a couple of questions that I haven't investigated, but that I'm really interested in, and I'm hoping that some of the practitioners, or maybe some of you in the audience, have some opinions on this, as to how the proliferation, how the new technology that we were talking about a moment ago is affecting the involvement of different groups in the population. The use of YouTube to reach voters directly. Is that making a difference in terms of who's receiving campaign messages? and how it's influencing them. Is there a different social profile of voters who are paying attention to this? And internet fundraising as well, whether that, and this is actually something we were talking about earlier in between sessions, whether internet fundraising is changing the mix of contributors to presidential elections at all in significant ways. We don't know. I don't think there's any data on it yet. I would love to see it if there is. So, so there you go.
Well, I didn't mean to not have you put up the...
No, it's all right.
But I wonder if there's a way you can do it behind us so that you can do the fiddling while...
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so why don't you start fiddling while we...
Oh, that was fast. So you were right. Oh, what a pros team here. I'm used to like fiddling around with it. All right, so, but go ahead, Lynn, and then...
Right, so that we have time to do both, because I guess what I want...
There we go. Wow, I'm shocked.
Oh, well,
I'm usually...
Is my head right in the way of this?
Can you see it?
Okay, here.
Yeah, you're okay, Susan. We can see your hair. But, so of course, yellow, the default, right, don't know how to change the colors that Excel makes its charts, so yellow is not the best color for this. But you can see the spike. I've labeled different points on the graph, and so you can see that after New Hampshire, the graph is showing the gap between Obama and Clinton because he usually was ahead, so that was how I wanted to show them relatively. Showing them tracking together, it just looks like two lines crossing all the time, very difficult to discern. The blue line going across is the average gap, is the average amount per day by which Obama exceeded Clinton's fundraising. And so, you can see that, after New Hampshire, the line dips, which means Hillary starts to do better, and it stays down below the average for several days, up till the Nevada caucuses, and then it starts to go up back in Obama's favor. And then after South Carolina, it spikes in Obama's favor, stays, above the average for several days. Super Tuesday, it's down around the average, and then spikes right after Super Tuesday. Obama gets a little hit off of that. But then that deep, trough, thank you. The deep trough is the day after Clinton gave herself $5 million, right? Because the next day, money just flowed into her campaign like nobody's business, which I found really impressive. And so you can see, I also just, for information purposes, put in some of the other key primary dates. I think it's really fun to see how closely it tracks against the results of those events, right? And so anyone who says, oh, the order matters because it affects momentum, I think this is pretty good evidence of that the fundraising is really responding to how the candidates are doing in each of the different events. So there's that exciting slide.
And Jen, can you assume that the fundraising is responding much, much faster than it would have in the past?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, sure, of course. I mean, that's the internet, right? So, did you guys see the look of terror that came across my face when Susan said, I hope Jennifer will put on her political consultant hat? I was like, ooh, that hat, I threw that away like 12 years ago. I don't even remember that hat. But, so 12 years ago, we didn't have internet fundraising, and there were only about 20 House campaigns that year that even had websites. Mine was one of them. Well, that was a lot of fun, trying to have a website in 1996. But, the money would come in checks, the old-fashioned way, and we could track on the campaign that I was working on then, the receipts responding to various events, good press for our candidate, whatever. But there was definitely a lag of several days. Yeah.
Information from?
I downloaded the Federal Election Commission's database of individual contributions. So this doesn't include PAC contributions or unitemized.
Why do you think that reflects daily activity?
I'm sorry?
Why do you think that reflects?
Because it includes the date that the transaction was made.
Well,
it includes the date when the candidates report their receipts. They have to include the date that they received the money, not the date that it.
But no, that I know. But daily activity is also impacted by when they have fundraisers.
Oh, absolutely, and that was something I didn't go in and put Hillary has Big Bash in New York.
Right, but then the number would spike.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm not saying that I've explained all the spikes up there. I'm just pointing out some of the notable ones.
The fundraisers explain the spike perhaps more than the primaries.
You could be right. You could be right. I mean, I haven't gone in to sift it that far, and I probably will before I do the paper. But I don't think that the candidates were having fundraisers on the days of these primaries. And they may have been. I'm not sure.
No, they weren't. No.
Right? So, That would be
for those
surprising.
days.
That would be surprising if it was like, yes, we had a big banquet on the day of the whatever primary.
No.
So that clearly explains, I'm sure that explains some of the variation, but I would be shocked if it took away all the explanatory power of the timing of the primaries. Could be, I don't know.
Anyway, Lynn, I want to talk about, well, you talk first about what you want to talk about, then I'll ask you my question.
No, I want to know what your question is ahead of time, because it might be more interesting than what I wanted to talk about, and I'm flexible.
All right. My question is this. I have spent years at this university listening to political scientists tell me the enormous effect that the press has on these candidates, and years believing exactly the opposite based on my own experience, that the campaigns are always 100 steps ahead of us no matter what we do, that they're controlling us, it is not us controlling them. And I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, but who leads whom?
The answer is it's a little bit of both. So let me get in. That question does kind of mesh into what I wanted to talk about. But first of all, it is great to be back on campus. It's been 100 years since I was here last. And I studied actually political science in this very building, and I graduated from this very room 100 years ago. But I want to talk about, first of all, political communication in 2008 and what we have had that is new and different and impacts a lot on how the press and that intersection of press, politics, and public policy. Here are some of the new tools that we have. First of all, the most important thing, you can't even cover a campaign if you don't have a BlackBerry. The most important invention is the broadband card. That means that journalists are online every minute. Most of the time, if you don't know what a broadband card is, it allows you, it's a cell phone for a computer, so it allows somebody to be online. That means that you never not know what's happening in a variety of arenas. The other new communication tools are the YouTube that you mentioned, Flickr, and Twitter, which means that it's not a 24/7, it's a news cycle alone, which implies even some state of static being, but it is a constant ongoing. You have also, what is new is not only the rise of citizen journalists, who are often very informed people, but they have very legitimate outlets. The big story tomorrow about Obama, that is whether or not he was being disrespectful of the down and outs in Pennsylvania and saying that's why they have their views about guns and religion, came about because a citizen journalist was at an Obama fundraiser in San Francisco recently, and not only did she tape record what he was talking about there, but she had what now is a fairly mainstream outlet in Huffington Post. So you have political communication that is bypassing political reporters. By the way, I think the more the merrier. In case you wondered what I thought, that's what I think. It's more information, not less, but it means that we're constantly bombarded. And it's, every election cycle has something new in terms of what popular TV show is the new political conveyor. This year, I nominate The View. If you have a nomination, I'll be happy to hear that. This also means now that the idea that we have scoops, which we do, but they have very short shelf life. This afternoon, I filed a scoop that in the old days I would have held for the next cycle, and that is, I'll tell you what the scoop is, since it should have been on my blog, though I didn't have a chance to double check if the upload worked. Would you like to know what today's scoop is? Yes. Okay, I wrote that Obama is making plans and is considering going to Israel. Now, you would think 100 years ago when I started in the business, I would know more, tell you that, than it would be unthinkable. But as soon as you have something as obvious as a scoop, it goes up, which also means that the way that the press interacts with campaigns is very, very different. Everything has a short shelf life. Anyway, moving on. Quick overview on where the campaign is from my vantage point, which is basically I've been focusing mainly on Clinton and Obama. I've been doing Obama on an almost daily basis for a few years now, most intensely since I went to Africa with him in August of '06. Well, in case you haven't known, the happy days of Democrats reveling in this historic race are gone. It's been replaced by the tension that you get as you're near the end of this long process, which is, as it turned out, not asymmetric and ending in some splash early on, but has rather progressed in a very orderly way, much like the baseball season or NFL does. You have games, you have a date, you get a score. Actually, this is something that's quite tidier than most political situations that I cover. Some quick observations about Obama and how he's come to have this great success that he has up until this point, because I do think in the end, I don't want to surprise you, you wonder, what do I think? I do think he will get the nomination. I can't quite tell you how or why he will clinch. No, I can't tell you when he will clinch. I could tell you a little bit about why I think in the end he probably will. And the answer is he will have more delegates. Not a mystery. Now, one of the main things that Obama did early on is realize the value of the story. A lot of his campaign is about storytelling, getting people to tell their stories. It's quite done, though, on an organized, structured way, so organized that Obama early on built his own machine. I think his campaign understood that Clinton may well have, as it turned out it did, the support of the organized political establishment in a lot of places, so he just decided early on to create his own operation. The decisions that the Obama team made early on were very important and basically have not changed. The campaign that has unfolded is aspirational, inspirational, generational. It has one main message, that this is a candidate of change and that this is a change election. That is the main frame. The campaign has a superior ability to sometimes organize its communication. The whole discussion about superdelegates really got born on the night of February 5th in a hotel lower level room where David Plouffe added everything up. David is the campaign manager for Obama, and he started talking about how Obama will have more pledge delegates, more this and that, and we could go through the litany, and that's when they started talking about how the path, almost you could call it the path, that's what they called it, is closed to her. And they started talking about superdelegates. It was the conversation of the campaign that started the news cycle being written about the value of superdelegates. Anyway, very good staff, very solid. A lot of them do come from Washington. A lot of them have veterans of a lot of campaigns. They do a lot of things right. It's been solid. None of the changes and messy interior stuff that the Clinton campaign has suffered. Turning points for the Obama campaign: New Hampshire, they expected to win, they didn't. Ohio and Texas, they expected to clinch, they didn't. They adjust, life goes on. Turning point for the Clinton campaign is that she never really made the strategic decision of a failure to compete in all the states. That was more important, I think, than whether or not Mark Penn said she should run an experience rather than change. I think they just didn't see that they needed to have that backup plan, especially since Obama telegraphed his punch. They knew they had people in there. If she loses, I think the biggest reason is the failure to compete heavily in all the states. And again, while Obama has had very, very consistent message discipline, she had a lot of messages of change, except she changed her message. That's kind of my big view. One other point, she also had, and this is what makes, why is this election different from other elections? We're in the season where we can ask questions like that. One of the reasons is that we really do have, as Obama has said, he's running against two people. That's Bill Clinton. That, again, could be a whole other side conversation. I won't do it now, since perhaps if you have questions, we could get into it then. That's my overview.
Thank you. Let me go to Gina and just ask quickly about labor, if you can speak with a big hat for a minute about all of labor. How did labor come into this season looking at things, and at what point did it become clear to which personages in organized labor which way they were going to go, or whether this was a tough decision?
It's been a while since labor could be defined as organized labor, I think. And I think that this year there weren't clear choices. Right? It wasn't Gore versus Bradley, where it was clear that labor ultimately was going to go with Gore because of a lot of history and power. And I think one point I would make is, if labor were unified and had chosen a candidate, I think it's possible that the outcome would be clearer today than it is. But because in many cases, the union that I work for, the Service Employees International Union, which spends more and organizes more in terms of politics than any other union, didn't unify until, until 5 days before Ohio and Texas. And so, in fact, there was not a unified effort. So I think more than anything else, the fact that labor is split is not startling news, but if it had been unified, it might have made a difference, or if some unions had made a decision early on, it might have made a difference, in part for Hillary Clinton, because some of them are actually helping to underwrite television that she can't afford in some states. So, I think it's mixed, a mixed outcome for labor, though I think whomever is the nominee, and I agree with Lynn that Obama is certainly likely to be the nominee, that labor will feel well-connected and well-served by hopefully a future Democratic president.
And I'd like to ask all of you, before we open it up to the audience, whether this is a transitional sort of, what to me seems an anarchic, anarchy. Seems an unusually messy set of candidates and an unusually messy campaign, whether this is transitional, whether this is in fact the same, and we simply forget that we always have lots and lots of candidates. In fact, in many ways, the process is shorter than it's been before. And are we on to something completely different 4 years hence, or is it going to look like this again? And why don't you all just go down the line and no? Okay, let's start with Lynn.
I think the answer is I doubt it, unless you have two other superstars that are waiting on the wings right now that can be identified this early on. What makes this different? Why was there so much attention right away to the Democratic primary instead of the many people running in the Republican side? Now, they were all people of stature, most everybody, but you had this running for history, you had the historic nature of the candidacies, and you had these mega superstar people running. And if you get me two more superstars in the next cycle, then I'll say, yeah, we will have something to build on. I think that, and I don't see anyone in the wings. Is there another former First Lady Senator who's about to run for president? You show me that person. If Laura Bush wants to go run for the Senate and then run for the president, I'll say we have some models to work with. This is extraordinary because of the people who are running. And I actually think some of what has unfolded is not all that extraordinary. You've had some new technologies that have been brilliantly applied by the campaigns. You have an extraordinary amount of money, but it seems that every cycle I write yet another story that there's more money being spent now than the last. So you have the extraordinary ability to communicate. And so I don't see this as any kind of, there are paid political professionals using an extraordinary amount of tools to communicate, and candidates are figuring out messages. For all the talk about people doing things differently, and I don't know this much about the McCain campaign, I I am so Democrat-focused in my coverage, there's still the traditional organizing on ethnic groups, constituency group, looking for labor relations. So all this stuff that you have been doing is still going on. What is new is the add-on. I don't see anything that you've dropped as a result of this new tool. You know, you just more stuff in the toolbox, but you don't throw anything out.
And Bob, on the Republican side, does this campaign alter the trajectory of whatever becomes the next Republican campaign? Is there anything earth-shattering about this?
Well, I tend to agree with what you say. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think the Republican side, you know, we Republicans tend to give it to the gentleman who's, we feel it's his turn. It tends to be a gentleman. Although I do think Republicans will hopefully likely be the first party to elect a female president. I will say that. But we tend to do that. And John McCain started this campaign as the front runner. What he didn't anticipate along the way was, in becoming a front runner, he became very close to George W. Bush, hugging him, literally and figuratively, and also immigration reform. And he underestimated the impact within his own party and the grassroots and among conservatives and their disdain for that one issue campaign. But he was trying to connect the dots as the presumptive nominee or front runner in this race. He didn't anticipate that. He also mismanaged his early money. He had $35 million, and next thing you know, he turned around and didn't know where it went. Mitt Romney got into the race as the true conservative. What Mitt Romney didn't anticipate was Mike Huckabee. Right when Mike Huckabee was getting rolling, we didn't anticipate how much Fred Thompson would take out of our hide in South Carolina. So we had, each of these candidates had their ups and downs, but ultimately the Republican Party and Republicans around the country ultimately did what we usually do, which is pick the guy who we think's it's his turn, and that was John McCain. I think what makes this election unique, aside from the open seat, is it's a real change election. I mean, no question about it. And my feeling is also that Barack Obama will become the nominee. He's the true change agent in this election. He represents so many things. We all are applying every positive attribute we can onto him. We hope for him. Most Americans do. Republicans do not. Of course, we hope for John McCain. But I think that's where we are, and that's where we're headed. So I don't see it. The tools, certainly. You know, everything, when we began the campaign, it's all about how do we harness the internet. Well, we were talking about that 2 years ago as well. Well, we harness it by being more creative, by being first. We recognize the 24/7, the instant. You know, each of the National Press Corps that followed us and traveled with us have their own blogs. I don't know how, do our editors involved anymore? That's my question. We'd be talking with Joy Lynn at CBS News, and the next thing you know, it was on the blog.
It's hard because if you wait for editing before you post it, you lose it. Because if that takes 10 minutes, you might have a micro scoop.
I did notice, however, a change in the press on our planes, our charter planes. You know, when you're an insurgent candidate and you're coming out of nowhere and you're having the huck-a-boom, as Drudge put on his front page, the press corps traveling with you tends to be younger, and they tend to get a little Stockholm syndrome. I mean, they're kind of rooting for you, and it is interesting to watch that, and they should be honest about it because they are now tied. Those producers, those reporters, they're tied to you. And boy, you just won the Iowa caucus, and now you're on a 737 heading to New Hampshire. Boy, imagine if I'm on with the candidate that actually wins this nomination after South Carolina or Florida or Texas. What this is going to do for my career. I did notice that. That was interesting. But otherwise, I think no. I think the trajectory is similar. I think what we have here on the Republican side is a candidate who, if he does win, a lot of people think he's a one-term president, given his age. That may or may not come into play. So who he selects as vice president, we'll wonder if that is going to be the next person.
You have any thoughts on who that might be?
I have no idea. Mitt Romney, I'm sure, is on some list. I think Mike Huckabee is as well, but I don't see Mike Huckabee being selected. It could be a possibility. It would be nice. I think there are a lot of the target groups that John McCain is going after and has identified, I think fit right in with Governor Huckabee's message and what he represented in the primary. But no, I don't think so. I think John McCain does need to shore up his support among conservative activists, because Republicans, if we are to have a chance to win this election, we need to not just vote for John McCain, but we need the activists on our side of the party to actually go out and work hard for John McCain. That's why he needs a conservative, and that's why he needs a conservative on his ticket.
So I'll try not to repeat what others have said because I basically agree with Lynn. I just make a couple of points. One is, I mean, it is transformational when you have a woman and an African American running. You know, it's always easier to be second than to be first. You know, when probably some of us up here have been firsts at things. And so I think that is transformational. I think the coverage, you know, is transforming, but the particular incidents are the same. In 1984, a critical moment was, believe it or not, the New Jersey and California primaries, which were on the same day, the very last day. Mondale had not won the nomination, and I will always remember it because there was some off-the-record press picnic at my home in New Jersey, and it was reported that Gary Hart had just said at a fundraiser in California that he pitied his wife, who, while he was drinking wonderful California wines, she was drinking sludge in the water in New Jersey. And this came into somebody, you know, some reporter who ran to one of the phones in my home, and I had these lousy phones, and they yelled at me. There was no, you know, there was no internet, there was no nothing, but this was a huge story. And it lasted for 3 days because there wasn't anything else. There was a press conference with a Republican governor and Joan Mondale the next day where he gave her a We Love New Jersey t-shirt. It shows you the difference in the timing and the transformation of the press, but the same stuff happens. Year after year, campaign after campaign. I would also, on the money side, just a moment of personal privilege, I would like to, something that always goes unnoticed, it was actually the Bill Bradley campaign that petitioned the FEC to make it legal to accept credit card contributions over the web for presidential campaigns, and we were the first campaign to actually raise $1 million over the web. Just so, you know, someone had to start it. Right. We were the first. We petitioned, we wrote a letter to the FEC asking them to make it possible to accept credit card contributions because they wouldn't, because you had to sign before then. And it's come a long way, as you can imagine, but nevertheless, proud of that moment. And finally, you know, things come around all the time. Back in the 80s, it was very important to organize to win the nomination. That was because we had arcane rules where you had to have delegates actually get petitions signed to be on the ballot so that people could vote for delegates rather than the candidate. And organizing counted. It's one of the reasons why, in fact, Walter Mondale survived the Gary Hart, you know, post-New Hampshire boom. And now we, as Lynn said, it was Obama's instinct to organize and his campaign's recognition that if they organized those caucuses, they could run the table during a period of time. And so I would say nothing much changes, except we have moments where, whether it's technology or it's the face of the candidates change. And that, I think, is what is changing, not the basics.
Here's what I want to underscore on your point. So you might ask, wasn't it, why did the Obama campaign decide to organize in all these states? And the answer is they know how to count. You have to get to 2,024 delegates. They kind of thought, I wasn't in the room, you know, they look at a map, let's just say Hillary Clinton gets some of the big states, so where are we going to get our delegates? Oh, there's a handful of states that, you know, if one state is 55 delegates, but we could win 55 delegates by being competitive in other states, and oh, because the Democrats have these rules of proportionality, she might win a state, but we can win delegates along the way. All we have to do, and that's why this is not complicated, is get to 2024. Who cares where you get it from? Now, in the argument for superdelegates, or what was it, publicly elected, elected officials and
PLOs and unpledged PLOs. And
so the point here is that, you know, sometimes this is, to make a simple thing, to make a point on how the logic and the strategy, I think, came out of just looking at the numbers, which they've always done. It wasn't a choice. Let's really see if we, you know, the number is we have to get to 2,000 whatever. Maybe she'll be strong here and here, so there's only 50 states. You can't get more, 50 states plus the territories. And it's finite. So out of that came the strategy and the logic. the potential fatal flaw of the Clinton campaign is that they had the resources to perhaps just say they never ran that other scenario, the what if worst case. And for however the Obama campaign really decided to go or not, I think it was pretty conscious from what I gather, it was also born out of necessity. They didn't have the luxury of whatever, but in the end, there's nothing new about having to win the nomination. You have to get to 2,000-something delegates, and no one cares how you do it, and that's true on the Republican side. Whatever you get them, you win them, you win.
All right, and I'll just make one last point on everything stays the same. I remember when in 1999, Bradley, there were all these polls showing, Bradley, the insurgent, was doing well against Gore, and he was stumbling and mumbling around. And the Gore campaign came out and said, well, they're going to start 500 delegates ahead because they had all the superdelegates. So, things don't change particularly. They're still superdelegates, the candidates who, say they have them, and so it's just another fact about things that are just part of the system.
Jen, I'm going to give you the last word either on that or on, you decide the last word, and then we're going to open it up.
Well, I agree with a lot of what's just been said. I think that, when I think about what's really significant about this election cycle, and whether it's transitional or not, I think about the technology and the sort of leaps, how each 4 years we're seeing how technology is impacting the races and making it feel very different, even if, as we're reminded, it's not really that different, but they're feeling different. And I think that's just going to continue. I can't wait to see in 2012, it's going to feel different again. And I have no idea what the technology or, I don't even know what to call it because, I want to say the website, well, who knows what it's going to be. But it's going to be something. It's going to be exciting.
Candidate holograms.
Yeah, exactly. I hope so. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But, I think that we'll continue to see rapid changes in the technologies that are available to campaigns, and that will affect how they're run, and in some cases, may sort of affect who benefits and who doesn't. I mean, we've heard Huckabee, he did benefit from some of the changes in the way that campaigns are run. So, whether this is transitional or not, I don't really think so. I think it's just continuing a trend of, wow, the technology changes and that impacts everything, and it'll just keep on doing that.
All right, with that, let's give it to our very patient audience here on a hot Friday afternoon. Let's see. The gentleman there was first, and then the lady here. On your left, Mark, right there.
Everybody mentions the technology and how it has impacted these campaigns. And working in the private sector, I've seen lots of technology, and I consider myself an early adopter of technology. And I see that the journalism side of this whole process has been impacted because of the efficiency of getting the message out. But I don't necessarily understand how the campaigns have been innovative in the use of technology outside of just adopting what's already in the private sector. Could you all speak to that?
Yeah, I think for us in our campaign, what we recognized really was that we had to be different. Everything we did about our campaign had to say, this guy's different. Number one, and everybody's got a website, everybody's interactive, everybody's going to be on YouTube and so forth. And when we went out, of course, we did the Chuck Norris fax spot for Mike Huckabee, which was big in many ways. Number one, it tapped right into our base of supporters, our Texas Walker Ranger, or Walker Texas Ranger, thank you, folk, fans. Also, he's popular with the military, and he's obviously an internet kind of phenomenon. A few years back, we're kind of on the trailing end of Norris, but picked him up. But what we learned when we did that was also that we had to keep things fresh. We had to keep things new. And the great thing about a candidate like Mike Huckabee, who's extremely talented in his own right as a strategist and a media consultant, was that things had to be fresh. Right after we get a big hit with the Chuck Norris spot, and it's getting 1 million hits on YouTube in 3 or 4 days, he's immediately saying, what next? What do we do next? How do we grab this? How do we roll with it? How do we feed off of it?
Did he come up with the what next, or did he just tell somebody else
to come up? He just said, where are we going from here? Let's think about, how we keep it fresh. If you notice our website, and the websites of most of the candidates had, and they still do, have a login page. That's the first thing you hit. Our page was just always interactive. It was fresh. It was full time. So we wanted to make it very sticky. I mean, if there are any innovative things on technology that was used this cycle, I think it was taking existing internet, website, connectivity, viral marketing approaches, but keeping it current, fresh, and updated, not weekly, not every other day, but hourly. And we had not a whole lot of staff, but we had 2 or 3 individuals that were constantly, every time you wanted to click back to our site, there had to be something new on it. Something that, kept it sticky, kept folks coming back. And those folks were our folks. And these are the people that, within the Republican Party, we felt have been overlooked for too long, and particularly by the leading candidates and the pundits and the conventional wisdom. And these are the evangelicals, homeschoolers, fair taxers, folks that were given $5, $10, $75. Mike Huckabee was their candidate, so we spoke to that. So in terms of innovation, we're lucky that we had Mike Huckabee as a candidate, because when you have somebody like him, he's willing to take a lot of risks. He's willing to do things, that take you right up to the cliff, and then he'll tell you when to pull back, if any. When you have the committee of 12, it's very difficult to get things through. Sometimes I see advertising, and you could just tell 4 or 5 media consultants vetted that. And you say, wow, that looks, the announcer sounds great, pretty pictures, but what am I seeing here? And basically it's all this kind of risk-averse approach that large, big campaigns have. When you have Mike Huckabee, his campaign manager, Chip Salzman, media producer, Bob Wickers, his daughter, Sarah Huckabee, is national political director, and we're sitting there around the table going, Chuck Norris just endorsed us. Great. Have you ever seen ChuckNorrisFacts.com? It's hilarious. Kids are into it. Let's get this on. And Mike Huckabee sitting there saying, let's do it. Call Chuck. Let's put it together. Let's go shoot it. That's great. And that allowed us to kind of, if we're talking about insurgencies and how you kind of have to move quickly and be that way, that's the way we were. In terms of innovation, I mean, that's one example.
I'd just like to say, it's not so much, technology is innovation. It's being smart about how you use it. That campaigns, the Obama campaign has been extremely smart about how it used the internet to both be directive and to let people do their own thing. And that was what was so smart. They told people, go do this, because people wanted to do something for them. It's not what the Dean campaign did. It just, said, do whatever you want, So I think it is acknowledging the innovation and then being smart about how to use it.
Another way, real quickly on that, I agree, is there's a lot of independent creative advertising going on out there in the net. And campaigns like ours are willing to use it. So when our supporters are out there working on their Mac Pro, Final Cut Pro, putting their spots together, sending them to us, I'm looking at it and saying, wow, this is pretty good stuff. Let's put it on. Let's get an agreement. So you see that happening now as well. A lot of campaigns will just take, Sally Smith from, Pennsylvania. Yeah, exactly.
All right, the lady over here.
Just to tag on, it sounds like you're getting ready for Huckabee to run again. But be that as it may, my question is this. In California, we have a large push on absentee ballot voting. And I don't know whether this is pervasive through the country, but if this does gain more momentum, how will you adapt your campaign to deal with that? I'm asking anybody.
For me, I work in a lot of different states, and some states have almost all absentee. Washington State's one where everybody votes absentee, pretty much. And so it really becomes timing. We do a lot of analysis in those states of when those ballots are cast. So you'll see some that are initially cast, maybe 10 or 15%. People get their ballots, they send them right in. And most of the electorate will hold those ballots. So it really is a matter of kind of timing for us in our advertising, our communications.
And actually, you use the word adapt. The campaign's adapted. It's not because the situation is it's not absentee voting. It's really early voting. It's rolling voting. A lot of it's taking place, and the campaigns had campaigns within campaigns that were doing it. Obama and Clinton were naked about telling people. I mean, they didn't. There's no mystery. They said, "Go vote today. You're here. Great. Go out and vote. Don't wait," because they wanted to lock in the sale.
Some would say that Clinton's victory in California was in part due to the fact that a huge number of people voted early when she was viewed very positively and when he was little known.
Remember that last weekend I was at UCLA when Oprah was there, Carolyn Kennedy was there, Maria Shriver showed up out of the blue for her endorsement, even Stevie Wonder wandered by. Okay, so that kind of momentum at the end might not have the impact it would have had. Yeah.
Let's get another question. Go ahead. Mark.
When your candidate went on the Stephen Colbert show, were you worried about what might happen?
No, never.
Why not?
We sought those opportunities out. Mike Huckabee's got a tremendous sense of humor, and he knows when you're in those situations, it's silliness, it's comedy. We were in South Carolina, and he did the remote. I think the funniest exchange Mike Huckabee had with any of those guys was Colbert in his final interview with Colbert. The second to final before the air hockey game. But and this was taken remotely from South Carolina. We're campaigning in South Carolina. We pull the bus over. He goes into a television station. He's looking into a blank black screen, which is the camera. And he's got the earpiece on, so there's a delay. It's not the best format to be funny or the timing and everything. It turned out to be the greatest show because it's all silliness, it's all fun, and you got to be able to roll with it. You see candidates that just stiffen up, and when Steve Colbert says, "Hey, Governor, I hear you're having a hard time raising money. Here's a perfect way to do it. You can buy any amount of guns you want in South Carolina down there. Buy a ton of them, bring them up here, we'll sell them on the street." And without a beat, he goes, "Stephen, how do you think we've been funding this campaign thus far?" It's those kind of ideas, and then saying stuff like, "Hey, I just want to hear you say it one more time and ask me to be your vice president." He goes, "Stephen, will you be?" And he's like, "Yes, 1,000 times yes, yes." And it's just that exchange. So it's a candidate who's very comfortable, whether he's on Bill Maher's show talking about drug addiction, HIV, whether he's on Colbert just yucking it up, Daily Show, it doesn't matter. We're never worried. We always seek it out, and he's very good at it.
When he was on Saturday Night Live in the sketch, the Weekend News Update, and they said, "Okay, it's time to go, it's time to go." Some people said that he overstayed in the sketch, but did the sketch go as it was supposed to?
Yes, he was supposed to overstay. That was the joke.
No, but then he overstayed the overstay. That's what people said.
Yes, that was the joke. Here's what Saturday Night Live does, and having been through that with him.
Right, because we knew once
why.
and twice it was funny, but then they 3 or 4. So the idea
it
that
had
I got out
to be to the
there.
point where you were annoyed.
Okay.
And it looked like the folks on the set were annoyed. Saturday Night Live, they do a dress rehearsal, and then they bring in an audience, and they do the whole show in front of a rehearsal audience. So and then they clear that audience out. Then they bring that audience. So that was the third time they had done that sketch, and they worked on it. So yeah, it was good.
Good to know.
But we never worry about that. We sought that out.
Lynn mentioned earlier to maybe get back to this in the question period, so that's what I want to ask. The role of Bill Clinton in this campaign, from whatever perspective that you want to take it. Good, bad, ugly.
Today it's bad. Let me tell you why. Here is what the Obama campaign, I know this seems so rude, but my social behavior is different than everyone else's because I just feel a need to be on top of stuff because you never know. So here's what the Obama campaign just sent out. A little memo about how all 3 of the network news tonight is playing up the story about how Bill Clinton re-injected into the campaign the Bosnia story. So that means that a story that maybe had gone away about the embellishment of Senator Clinton about arriving in Bosnia under sniper fire, that faded. That's good. That was a bad thing for it. Gone. So Bill Clinton resurrects it. So the Obama campaign, helpfully, because they want to help me do my job.
There was a good story on Politico, I think yesterday, that pointed out that Bill Clinton probably couldn't survive the YouTube if he was president. We had YouTube when he was president.
Right. So what was supposed? So the point is, the lead at World News Tonight, presidential politics. He draws crowds. He helps, but. In this case, in Terre Haute today, President Clinton said his wife called him and told him to stop defending her false story about landing in Bosnia amid sniper fire. Then they have the cut from Bill Clinton. She said, "Look, just let me handle this because you don't remember it either." I said, "Okay." So this is.
So, Lynn, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question.
So the answer is yes. He's a problem. He's wonderful in fundraising. No one can help better than Bill Clinton, and he's also come with his own set of problems.
Let me ask you a question, which is that the press makes choices, right, on what to put on. You told us, that Obama said whatever he said at the fundraiser, which was appeared to be diminishing of an important voting segment in Pennsylvania. So that was a competing story today.
And the Republican National Committee just this moment sent out their, speaking of that.
Right. But what I'm saying is the press makes a choice between the Obama story, which are words out of his mouth, about an important constituency in Pennsylvania, and the Bill Clinton story, which is, Bill Clinton being the bad Bill Clinton on the campaign trail. And I'm wondering if, because in general the press has determined that, we are headed towards the Obama nomination, they are helping that become a self-fulfilling prophecy by the choices they make on the stories they cover. Because I remember a few weeks ago when, Bill Clinton, said something else that was, not great. I think it was, yes, he got mad over Richardson's endorsement. That same day, Obama was sort of snarky to a voter. I can't remember what happened. Do you remember that? And the third thing that happened was that a poll came out that showed Clinton was ahead in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and some third state in the general election. What was featured was Bill Clinton on Richardson that day. So it just, it seems to me the choices that are made at times are choices based on, predicting the future and making sure, it may not be intentional, but is he a big enough story that he always leads regardless of what else is going on?
We are not a monolith.
No, we are not. But I'm just saying, I think, I'm talking more about the cable news, obviously, but I think that something is going on here.
I think the whole Clinton team, the Bill Clinton team, as surrogates, is a mistake for Hillary Clinton in the campaign. I think it's been a strategic mistake on her part. And I'm talking about Carville, Begala, Landy Davis, Bill Clinton, the whole crew. I think when you're in a changed election, we have, on the Republican side, obviously we have an individual who's older and obviously from the Vietnam era in terms of what his formative years and in terms of defining him as an American hero and so forth. I recognize that. But when you have this type of an election with this type of a Democratic opponent, to have surrogates go on the attack, okay, it's a standard strategic campaign play, no question, all's fair. But make the right choices on who those folks are going to be. And I think that whole group was a strategic mistake.
I don't necessarily disagree. I'm more in terms of what gets paid attention to.
But it's just, to me, it's not just Bill Clinton. Yeah. I guess is the answer to his original question. It's not just Bill Clinton. I think it's that whole White House core from the 90s.
I want to quickly interject something to Jen. One of the things you all taught me here is that what this kind of strategic stuff, this kind of sort of day-to-day nonsense is a minute part of what matters in who gets elected, and that most of the press spends their time like this, missing the forest for the trees. Does the technology change that, or has political science changed its view of how important the kind of day-to-day?
Does technology change the importance of the day-to-day developments? I don't know. I think that's a great question. I want to think about it for a moment because I could make up some hypotheses, but I don't have any data or impressions right off the bat to answer that. I mean, I think that political scientists, let me know if you know something I don't, but I don't think that we've really been able to model in any of our empirical analyses how the technology might have impacted the sort of relative importance of different variables in determining the eventual outcomes. I mean, that would be a very difficult thing to do.
The question gladdens my heart.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's under question by you, and so now maybe I'll go think about it and try to write an article. But I don't know of anyone who's actually asking that particular
And even
question.
so, I think
probably because it's hard.
Some potential valuable empirical data has been lost, such as people will say, even if you want to, I don't know if, people often go back and study the nightly news, but unless people have kept and have access to cable, which exists, so somebody, an academic, could go back and measure that,
Stuff, yeah.
which will take time. But these very influential blogs, which have enormous influence on the conversation, especially in the Democratic Party. Blogs are to the left what talk radio was to the right in this cycle. And to measure that influence, you could maybe go back if you had access to hits or something, but you have to have the content. And that's going to be very, very tough to
absolutely
to recover.
And this is something we were talking
about. The study, when you study this race, to really, there's studies on the role of blogs, and if no one has kept it, if no one has the archival stuff, I don't know how you will really get some of this analysis of this race right, because I don't even know if within the cycle of Huffington Post, which is so influential among Democrats, but this is an answer you could find out, I could ask, but is there a record that could be retrievable of how long everything was up, what time it went?
And how many hits it got at what time?
Well, that they would know. But, in moving this story about the whether or not Obama made a big mistake at the San Francisco fundraiser, broke on Huffington Post. Of course, the campaigns helped, the Clinton campaign helped move it along today. But if you want to just do a case study of the anatomy of, let's say this becomes a very terrible problem for Obama and this changes the narrative. Minister Wright and Obama's problems with his minister, that changed the narrative. Fatal? Probably we won't know until the general how it plays out. But these turning points, for the people who will study it, I fear that we're losing some of the chance to get some of this data. And going back to your point about real information about money and fundraising, candidates still in this day and age don't tell you all that you need to know to really understand how the money came in. So, I think there's just a lot to retrieve.
I want to actually, Susan, your question made me think of
Get the final word because we're getting the hook.
We're getting the hook. Okay. Well, I was wondering whether even the influence of variables that we already know about, like media coverage, whether that's being whether there's some kind of interaction effect with the new technology. I'm thinking about the the Bosnia story, and so that ran for a few days. And then the great videos started showing up on YouTube, right? Not the same day, but I wonder whether that sort of lengthened the life of it. They didn't need Bill Clinton to reintroduce that because there's new stuff being posted every day, and some of it's very funny and has hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of hits. Days, sometimes even weeks after the event itself, but its life is extended by the, I guess, citizen response and by the fact that our responses can be broadcast to the whole world, and sometimes they're actually engaging and catch fire. So that may actually be mediating or enhancing somehow.
The subject of the upcoming generations' dissertations, right? A huge set of fodder. I want to thank all of you guys, and thank you, the audience. I see Jack coming up, I think. Oh, okay. Anyway, thank you, panel, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and to underscore what Lynn Sweet just said about the 24-hour, the instant news press, I read a blog. It's called the March Madness blog. And let me read you the latest thing, which has some bearing on this campaign. In a move that's sure to be seen as controversial, Hillary has contacted the NC2A Board of Directors to argue that Memphis is actually better qualified to be national champion. Ms. Clinton stated that Memphis, while losing the game, had actually shown more ability to act like a national champion on day one. She argued that Memphis had passed every test during the game, including scoring more points than Kansas for 38 minutes. For 38 minutes, they had shown the experience necessary to be national champion. Just because some team comes along in the last minute and scores more points than the other guy doesn't mean they're necessarily able to be national champion at 3 a.m. on day one. Ms. Clinton further stated that Memphis should have won the game had Derrick Rose's second-half three-pointer been allowed to count. Instead, it was ruled a 2 after review by the officials. His foot was clearly inside the line. Memphis coach John Calipari said he would ask that the rule allowing monitor review of shots be changed after the season. Hillary said she seconded that and pointed out that had Memphis been allowed to count a 3 that wasn't really a 3, they would have won. It doesn't matter what the rules of the game are before it starts. What matters is how we change the rules after the game so we can have the winner we want. So much for Florida and Michigan. On that note, I want to thank everybody again and remind you that tomorrow morning with a breakfast at 9:30 and a final session at 10 a.m., we welcome you back. And thank you again for a wonderful day here.